Hello and welcome to Acting on Climate, a special leadership spotlight series brought to you by the World Green Building Council as part of World Green Building Week 2020. This year's campaign is Act on Climate, and we are delighted to bring you a series of conversations involving industry leaders already acting on climate to discuss the opportunities net zero buildings present in addressing some of the most critical issues of our time. This year, we are calling on governments to implement policy to drastically reduce emissions from the building and construction sector. Throughout the week, our network is highlighting the action that businesses, governments, and green building councils are taking to drive the uptake of net zero buildings. We will also highlight the benefits they bring for resilient communities, the health of our planet, and to support thriving economies. Our industry is ready to mainstream net zero buildings, and bolder and more ambitious regulation is now required to unlock their full potential. This series will be hosted by a World Green Building Council staff member each day in conversation with industry experts around a specific topic. So earlier this week, we had a fascinating dialogue between our CEO, Christina Gamboa, and industry experts about how net zero buildings can support economic recovery efforts. And yesterday, an important conversation with Katrina Brady, head of our Better Places for People project, about how addressing the conflict between achieving net zero and enhancing human health in buildings. As you can see, we have an exciting schedule lined up for the rest of the week. We encourage you to join the other sessions taking place following today's session on net zero for communities, the planet, and economies. We have one tomorrow with Matt Adams from the Advancing Net Zero team on bringing embodied carbon up front. And then to end the week, we have Dominica, our Director of Membership and Regional Networks, in a conversation about how net zero buildings can restore the health of the planet. So please do join these sessions this week and visit our YouTube page to see recordings of the sessions that have already taken place. You can get involved in this session today by submitting your questions through the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel on the right of your screen. We'll keep an eye on this throughout the session and bring them into the conversation where we can. We'll also be launching some live polls throughout the discussion, so keep an eye out for those so that we can get to your input. You can also get involved on social media. Share your involvement in our event by posting on social media using the hashtags on screen, so Act on Climate and WGBW 2020. You can visit our World Green Building Week website to find out how you can learn, share, and lead on net zero buildings. And you can also find there our call to action statement, which is calling on governments to implement policy for net zero buildings, and you can submit an endorsement on behalf of your organisation. As moderator for today's panel, I'm delighted to introduce myself and our panelists for today's discussion. My name is Victoria Burrows. I am the Director of Advancing Net Zero at the World Green Building Council. So our speakers today are firstly Marcin Mitchell, Global Head of Strategy and Business Development for the IFC World Bank Group, Climate Business Department, which oversees the growth of $8 billion of climate investment portfolio. So welcome to the conversation, Marcin. We also have Mina Hasman from global architecture firm Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. Mina leads the sustainability and wellness operations and long-term vision for the practice, challenging existing best practice on complex international projects. Welcome, Mina. We also have Bianca Wong, Global Head of Sustainability for Kingspans Global Operations, Products and Supply Chain, and she's a passionate advocate of a fabric-first approach to high-performance buildings. And then finally, Cynthia Curtis, Senior Vice President of Sustainability at JLL, a financial and professional services firm specializing in commercial real estate and investment management. So welcome everyone to this very important conversation. I'm going to drop the slides from the screen just now so we can all see each other. Hi everyone, welcome and good morning to those of you joining us from the States. Good afternoon to everyone else, and hello to everyone else joining us here today. So I'd like to start with just a few brief remarks setting the scene for our conversation, and then we've got lots of questions to get the conversation started. Please do, as I've mentioned, use the questions panel to submit your questions and so that you can get involved in our conversation here today. So over the past few years, the building and construction sector has set out to redefine a sustainable built environment. It no longer means doing a little bit less bad or less harm, but taking accountability for the design decisions we make and the resources we use. In order to play our part in achieving a below 1.5 global temperature rise, and given the significant carbon emissions that our sector is responsible for, we need to go far beyond this traditional approach to green buildings. We need buildings that use net zero emissions, that do not rely on fossil fuels and are designed for the highest performance standards, not just in terms of energy consumption, but in comfort conditions, air quality, and material selection to ensure resilient, future-proof structures. This requires a radical shift in the way we design, construct, operate, and deconstruct our buildings. Radical cross-sector collaboration to achieve this, and everyone on every project working towards a common vision and embracing the creative thinking required to overcome this challenge. Preparing buildings that cannot achieve net zero today for a net zero tomorrow, and supporting the decarbonisation of electricity grids and becoming energy prosumers themselves. The entire campaign for this year's World Green Building Week has been designed to showcase those across industry already taking steps to act on climate and establish net zero buildings as our new normal, to take on the responsibility of driving change. And celebrating those companies, such as the three that we have on today's panel, who are embedding net zero into their own operations through signing up to the World Green Building Council's net zero carbon buildings commitment in advance of the regulation that we are calling for. Because the solutions exist, and so now the biggest barrier remaining to bringing those solutions to scale and reaching mainstream is not the tools or technologies that we have already, but rather the perception of what it will take. Every new and existing building has the potential to reach zero carbon, no matter its typology or location. It starts with asking the right questions. So I have lots of questions for you ladies here today, and hopefully we can share some of your expertise and knowledge and insights in the programs that you are all operating in right now. So we're going to structure this conversation in terms of looking at economies first, and then communities, and then the planet, in line with our campaign messaging. And so let's start with economies. So since the economic impact of the global pandemic is at the front of mind for many, let's start here by exploring the benefits that net zero buildings can have on economies. So the messaging from our campaign is that investing in new and existing buildings today can stimulate innovation, activate supply chains, and create jobs to unveil a new economic reality that leads to a cleaner, brighter, and more resilient tomorrow. So we've seen the business case for green and net zero buildings strengthening over the past few years. So could you perhaps start by sharing what each of your organizations are doing to promote the businesses that can do well by doing good, and how this can support our broader economies? So perhaps I'll first come over to you, Marcine, please.
Great, well, thank you so much. So as you know, I work at the International Finance Corporation, and we're the private sector arm of the World Bank. And we have a very large green buildings program because we recognize how important it is to reduce emissions and go to zero net emissions in building if we're going to solve this climate problem. Working with the private sector, though, we have recognized that there are both, you can have both the environmental benefits as well as financial benefits. And we have a free software called Edge, and you can find it at edgebuildings.com. And this free software is great because it's a design software. It helps developers who want to be able to build green or incorporate green aspects and technologies into their buildings, how to do that. And giving them choices of how to do that. But the thing that's unique about it, it also has a financial calculator. So it shows what your savings are when you make these investments in these technologies. And as we know, when you do energy efficiency, you have huge savings in utilities, you have huge savings in water use, and you also can have savings even sometimes in the building, depending on what kind of technologies you use. And so this financial calculator helps show that building green is not only environmentally sound, which is incredibly important, but also can be financially sound and profitable. So I think that's one of the big messages is to say that there is a business case for building green. There also, you mentioned that we are in a point where many countries are, we're in the biggest recession we've been in decades, and now people are starting to look at how do we recover, right? And I think the idea of recovering in a green way is really important. And the building sector is key to that. It's a huge job creator in many countries. We're about to publish a paper next month looking at 21 emerging countries and ways that we can build back better, build back green. And one of them is through green buildings. In retrofits alone, tens of millions of jobs can be created quickly. $1 trillion or more of an investment just on retrofits. And then last year we had a flagship report on green buildings that said that new green buildings is a $23 trillion investment opportunity. So for the economy, it's really great. For the utility savings and the water savings and the other savings, it's really great. And of course, it's great for our planet.
Great, thank you very much, Marcin. That paints a hugely optimistic picture for our sector, so really encouraging. Thank you very much. And perhaps I can come to you next, Mina. On paper, that sounds fantastic. How do we go about convincing clients on, through the projects that you work on, the sorts of benefits that can come from not just looking at the upfront cost, the business case, but looking over the whole lifetime of the buildings as well?
Thank you, Victoria. I think it's really, you're touching up a very good point, that it's really important to look at it at a whole life, from a whole life perspective, not only from a whole life perspective at the phase of the design stage of the project, so that our responsibility very much carries on beyond the day of construction completion, and also the whole life of that built environment or the asset that is being either renovated or created from scratch. So it's really important to look at the extended responsibility cycles, both as designers, as I'm heavily involved in the design stage of the projects, but also once the buildings are constructed. And I wanted to actually also slightly touch upon, going back to your original question, slightly touch upon two key aspects, and one is very much heavily heard of and referenced across the built environment sector over the years, and World Green Building Council, along with other green building councils, there has been tremendous evidence that has been collated to really shine a light on the business case of net zero carbon buildings. But I think it's just this emphasis, and something we come across on a day-to-day basis in our practice, is how we communicate that business case to the diverse client backgrounds we have, and framing the conversation around the increased value of that asset beyond just the monetary and financial value, but the value as it brings to the health and well-being, to the community social structure, and to even the natural ecosystem of that environment. So the framing, I think, the value around looking at more holistically what kind of value implications a net zero carbon buildings has is really important part of the conversation of strengthen that business case that already is backed up with a lot of data. And if I may also mention something else that we at SOM specifically, in addition to not only continuously and consistently striving to design for net zero carbon buildings and bring our clients and the wider stakeholder teams along the journey, we also heavily invest in research. And we believe that, I think, a net zero carbon future, though it doesn't necessarily mean that traditional methods and strategies and systems that exist out there today is not going to be enough to get us to net zero carbon target. It definitely will, but it's just finding that synergies between traditional strategies and also bringing them together also demands a research, investment in research and investment in perhaps exploration. And we have been doing this quite consistently in the firm and in the work that we're doing. And we believe that this can have also an inherent and indirect, perhaps added value to the broader economies by creating new skills and by creating new areas of expertise that are required for a net zero carbon future. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mina. I think we can dive a little bit more into that value proposition over the following questions. So thank you so much. Perhaps Bianca next, please.
Yeah, sure. So at Kingspan, as you know, Victoria, we've been working on achieving net zero buildings across our portfolio through our net zero energy program, which we started in 2011. We're fully on track to meet that goal this year, and we've seen multiple benefits from that, including reducing our energy carbon intensity by 50%. We've reduced so far our light and heat costs by 35%, and we've also massively increased our on-site generation and energy reliance within our own portfolio. In terms of supporting the wider economy, the programme has led to significant investment to date, and we've also just issued a green bond for €50 million to help us meet this target, but also our new Planet Passionate programme. And we've invested heavily in energy performance contracts, solar PV systems, wind turbines, anaerobic digestion systems, etc. And so commitments like ours help to drive the market demand for these low carbon technologies, creating the skilled jobs that we need, and also to try and drive innovating solutions. We've tried to be quite open and provide insights on our journey along the way, not just of the benefits, but also the challenges that we face as well as a global manufacturer, one of them being decarbonisation of heat demand. So we've tried to work actively with industry to look at solutions for that across our portfolio. So I think it's being realistic and sharing kind of the benefits of what's available today, but also the barriers that need to be crossed as well, really, to, I suppose, enable this to go global on a large scale and plus support the wider economic community and also to create more jobs.
Absolutely. And again, we have a lot to share in terms of increasing that demand, which is really necessary to help drive those costs down. So thank you very much for that, Bianca. Over to you, Cynthia. What sort of trends are you seeing from your clients around the business case?
Good morning, Victoria. First of all, I just want to say I'm so thrilled to be here with all these really wonderfully accomplished women on our panel today, and just listening to everything that they are each doing in their respective organizations. You know, we've had, I think, more time in grade, if you will. We've been at this now for a bit longer, and you know, Mina mentioned this, Marlene mentioned this, that we're having more evidence as a result of what that payback is. Yes, we've done some studies ourselves that have shown that there could be up to maybe a 10% increase in construction fees when it relates to a you know, a real green building. But the payback far outweighs that. 14% heightened rent, for example, greater occupancy. That's what we're seeing in our business. And you know, likewise, as Marlene mentioned, we're also investing in technology, building technologies. We have an investment arm within our technology, our JLL Technology Services business, and we're investing in small, medium startups and who have that kind of unique technology that can help with the ongoing operations of the buildings. A friend of mine who's in construction said, you know, we've done We've done a couple of net zero buildings, but the issue is that operation. You can do it, you can build it. It's all great when you finish the get the CO for it, but it's the ongoing operations that are key. And so it's the design piece that Mina's talking about. It's that ongoing operations and how we manage that, how we ensure that we're bringing forward not only the benefits from an energy consumption and usage standpoint, but those health and well-being benefits that also are there for occupants. So it's very much a systems approach, and that's how we're approaching it at JLL. Working with our clients, working with our suppliers, advocating with policymakers. So it is that whole systems approach that we all need to be taking, and I think we're seeing evidence, thankfully, increasingly of that across the board.
Well, that's again very promising, and hopefully we're headed in the right direction with some of those trends. And perhaps, Marcin, I could bring in the countries that you work in the developing world as part of this conversation, because while some of these studies will be focused on some of the developed nations where some of these technologies are more freely available, what can we do to help support those developing countries leapfrog some of the choices we've made and the lessons we've learned over the past few years?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so the challenge with emerging economies versus in the developed world is the rate of growth. So we're seeing that the population's growing. We're seeing that more people are moving into the middle class, more people are moving into cities. So the increase of new buildings is very dramatic in emerging markets versus in some of the more built out countries, the US, Europe, et cetera. It's more about retrofitting. So there's hope in that, though, because obviously it's better to do it correctly the first time. It's cheaper, it's easier, and it's better to do it the first time. So we're really trying to get that message out, and particularly with the idea of building net zero carbon. So like Cynthia said, in our program, we have what we call net zero carbon ready buildings. So first, the idea is the first thing you have to do is build efficiently, right? And we call that edge advanced. You have to have 40% on-site efficiency of energy. So doing it right first in the building, but you can't stop there, obviously. So for net zero, our net zero certification takes 1 year of operating. And on top of being efficient, then you can use other technologies like bringing renewable energy onto the site or buying renewable energy off-site. And then finally, after you are efficient, you bring in renewable energy, then if you still have emissions, you can offset them. So that's the way of taking a building and moving it to net zero emissions under our scheme.
Great, good. So let's just sort of wrap up this economies section of our or portion of our conversation by talking a little bit about the investment community. We saw recently, I think it was last week, New Zealand, the news from New Zealand that they'll be the first in the world to require climate risk reporting from the financial sector. So how do you feel, how optimistic are you that the investment community will recognize this opportunity and embed it into decision making going forward? Because that will really help us unlock some of the solutions that we've been talking about so far. Who would like to take that question? Maybe Cynthia?
Yeah, I'm happy to start, Victoria. Thank you. I think it's great and very inspirational and encouraging to hear New Zealand demanding that from the financial sector. And I'm personally very optimistic about the investment community recognizing this opportunity now, especially because, as in the example of New Zealand, there are many more evidence emerging in the recent years, have been emerging in the recent years, clearly mapping the financial risks of inaction. And with a statistic, inaction on climate change, with a statistic that says it will cost the governments and the global economy 30% more if climate action is not already embedded in the investments of today. And that's a significant sort of uplift and a challenge to address when the time comes. Hopefully we will never be in that position. But also acknowledging these climate risks, I believe that the investment community will only continue to provide financial resources with evidence that is so far gathered to solutions that lead to a more climate adapted and resilient future. And we are actually already seeing this, if I may call, sort of grassroots initiatives and coalitions happening within the investor community around the world to help deliver the broader step change very much needed. The Climate Action 100+'s recent report indicates that over 500 investors, representing around 47 trillion, if I remember the number correctly, in assets, have asked more than 160 of the world's largest carbon polluting or emitting companies to commit to net zero targets and prove that they are changing their business models and processes accordingly. So I think there's definitely that demand, that expectation that is being built up from specifically for disclosure from the investment community, and also seeing more nations, such as in the example of New Zealand or Canada, and also soon to be demanding UK of companies to report on climate-related risks and impact data in line with the Task Force on Climate-Related Disclosures recommendations. We can say that the investment community is really starting to play their crucial role in this net zero movement.
Absolutely, and I love that you've touched on disclosure there, Mina, because Cynthia, there's something that JLL supports your clients with, this kind of shift to actually tracking the in-use performance of buildings and your actual impacts on a regular basis, and then making that public, like sort of sharing that information with the world. That's a very powerful tool.
Very, yeah, and I think, you know, the investment community, to kind of key off of also what Mina was saying, is, you know, they're looking at risk, they're looking at regulation, and they're looking at value creation. And again, you know, as we mentioned, we've got more and more evidence that this is that we need to take actions to mitigate the risk, and they're understanding what that translates to. The increased regulation, New Zealand is awesome. We also in New York, you know, local law 97, we've got, you know, it's increasing and it's only going to come, right? And they're not stupid. It's the writing on the wall. It's coming. And so isn't it always better to get ahead of that? So that regulatory piece can't really be underestimated. It does drive behavior. We all know that. But more to the point is, I got to mitigate my risk. How do I do that? Look at the value that I can create, you know, by taking these, you know, these steps and these actions. So yeah, how, you know, as you mentioned, Victoria, kind of scoring, if you will, the operational effectiveness of buildings is, you know, people like to see benchmarks. People like to see how they're doing against, you know, their neighbor. What does my portfolio look like versus these other portfolios are best in class, and what are the things I can learn from that? Because I need to be more efficient. I know I can save costs by that. I know I can increase the value of my asset, and so we're working with them. One of our clients, I don't think they'll be disappointed if I mention them, Nuveen, really takes this to heart, and it's about values for them, but it's also very much about their fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. And they take that very seriously, and they fully recognize that by putting in place, you know, if you will, green aspects into their properties, that asset is going to increase in value.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Good. Well, and hopefully the more research that we can conduct and the more organizations that are disclosing and bringing this data to the public domain, we can really help create and strengthen that business case, broader value proposition even further. It's a real challenge where some of those items that we're trying to monitor don't have a monetary value or something that's particularly well measurable. But I think it's something that we're really starting to bring within people's minds. So that's a good positive note for hopefully the mind shift that we need to see. Let's bring people into the conversation. So we've talked a lot about economies, the business case. We'll move on to communities in a sec, but we've had a question in from the audience already about how how you can guarantee that buildings are operated as they are designed. So if you've designed a building to net zero, if you, Mina, through the SOM practice have designed a building to, again, on paper or through the modeling, achieve net zero, and then you bring people into the building to actually use it, right? So how important is user awareness to making sure that you can achieve that performance standard that you then need to be reporting on?
Thank you, Victoria. I think it's an amazing question, and it lies at the heart of how fast we're going to deliver net zero buildings, truly performing net zero buildings in the coming years. And it's just a question of end user engagement, if wherever possible, from day one, and if not possible, at least conducting post-occupancy evaluation and having that rigorous monitoring in place together with the users, and not just necessarily attaching monitors in the building to track the energy use or water consumption, but engaging with that data and engaging with the insights that data provides to educate, train, and sort of collaborate and enable the end users to interact better with the building as it is intended to be used, is the only way I personally see for us to collectively within the global sector to deliver net zero carbon buildings that are really performing at that net zero level, not only at the day of construction completion or after a year, but consistently and continuously over the next century.
Yeah, and I'd like to just jump in. I think it's so important, this piece of education and really engaging with end users and giving them information. We have got invested in some low, moderate income housing in South Africa, and in each unit there is a metering piece that actually shows people how much consumption they're having, giving them information, what uses that they have, and then at the end of the month they also get information about how they compare to their neighbors. And I think Cynthia made that point, like if you get this little piece and says, you are a good citizen, you're above your neighbors, and you kind of feel good, or if you're like, well, you're below your neighbors, and wait a second, I can do this, I can improve my efficiency. So getting information to people, letting people see how what they are doing is affecting not only, again, the operation of the building, but also their bottom line, their utility savings, is very, very powerful motivation.
I'd love to just stick on that education piece for a moment, Marcin, and Bianca as well. I'd like to come to you about some of your direct experience with some of this in terms of your employee engagement programs to achieve some of the certifications that you have across your own portfolio already with Green Building Council rating tools and others. There's a Leave Zero certified school in Washington that has a big display, a big energy display that shows in real time what the energy generation is from the building and the consumptions, that encourages the kids to ask questions. And incredibly serendipitously, we've had a question that asks, while we are all working to increase our assets, I think this is referring to asset value, whilst aiming towards net zero, what should we be teaching a 10-year-old? Fascinating question. Who would like to take that one? Maybe I'll come to you, Bianca, based on your employee engagement strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see actually it's coming through a lot more in schools now than I suppose maybe it would have done 10 years ago. I see my nephew scolding my sister for leaving taps on and lights on. So, the awareness is coming there. Quite similar, I suppose, to something that Marcin mentioned there. So small behavioural changes actually that we had seen on the shop floor of our factories have been absolutely amazing in terms of reducing energy. So we used to have monitors that displayed the energy use of the line in kilowatt hours, and nobody really, it wasn't really linking back to people. So what we actually did is we changed it, included a pound sign as well, and the guys actually got really competitive about this, and there is a leaderboard now about how much they can actually reduce the energy on the line, because they see it then in real monetary terms of, you leave a line on for 5 hours, how much that actually costs, but such a waste of energy that it is. And we've tried to instill that net zero building ethos throughout the business and engage our employees to help us to achieve that. And something nice that we've seen from that actually is that it's gone beyond just their work lives into their personal lives, and we're trying to support our employees to try and get community projects off the ground and things like that. So it's creating that level of awareness first, a mindset shift and then really empowering people to move forward. And we've seen that at lots of our locations, and just by making those small behavioral changes and making it, very relevant to what they're actually doing within their job and feeling they're helping us to get part of that towards that journey, it's empowered them to actually go further indeed in their own homes. And we're trying to set up a kind of a home solar program type thing within the company, but then actually being champions in their community as well. So that's a really rewarding part actually of what we've been doing.
Oh, that's great. I mean, I would say that shifting the adult mindset is even harder than shifting the mindset of a child.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could jump in there too, I mean, I hear in my mind's ear, my father, what do you live in a barn, Cynthia? Close the door, that's how we grew up. Waste not, want not, the whole thing, shut the lights off, all of that. But so there's that. There's nothing like having that reminder by your parent or an adult. But to your point, Victoria, the kind of the adult learning piece, and people learn differently. We recognize that, right? It's visual, it's audio, it's tactile. In one instance, we had, this is not about net zero, but it speaks to kind of that employee engagement piece. We had a situation in India where we were wasting, we had a food line, if you will, buffet, and there was a tremendous amount of food waste after every meal. And so kind of the green team said, if we just started measuring this, weighing this food that we're wasting, and they would just post it on a whiteboard. Oh, by the way, yesterday or last week, we threw out collectively X kilograms of food, and that would have fed Y numbers of people. And in like 2 weeks, the reduction in waste was like 70%. And it's that translation of what your actions mean for others, for another, for another individual, or, it's important, I think, that we don't lose sight of connecting those dots, right? It's that communicating and connecting those dots of the meaningfulness of what your actions have or can have to pick it.
And that just really speaks to the power of data as well. One of the things that we have a challenge here in terms of trying to shift that mindset of this entire sector is to think about not just the way that the buildings are designed, but the way that they perform, and then not just the fact that turning on a light switch uses energy, but actually where that energy is coming from, which is so far removed from what you can actually see immediately. And then start to bring embodied carbon into the conversation and sort of tracking the carbon impacts of products that move around the world. That's really quite abstract for some. So being able to bring that right up into the front of mind is again a super sort of powerful way of hopefully trying to bring that mind shift forward. So I think this is a nice way that we can move into the community as part of the conversation. So in our messaging, we say that net zero buildings support a healthier and more sustainable built environment, creating thriving and resilient communities. So how important is considering the broader benefits of net zero beyond the energy performance and carbon emission improvements, and how are you seeing this manifest in the real world? So Marcine, perhaps I can come to you first of all.
Sure. So, we look at it, it's important to look at not just building by building by building. Obviously, it's important for each building to be efficient, but it is also to look at it in more of a comprehensive way. And so it really works with us in terms of our Smart Cities initiative. How do we get to those buildings? How do we use those buildings? How do we use those buildings to build community? How do we look at a different way of building our cities? And again, in emerging markets where so much of the cities have not been built yet, that are coming on in the next 10, 20, 30 years, this is an opportunity for us to look not only the efficiency of a single building, but how do we create an ecosystem around those buildings that are also low carbon, encouraging walking and cycling and public transportation, and having the opportunity to kind of live in a place where you can work and live and have community and have recreation all in an area where you can easily access it. So that's kind of the next step out, is to think about the buildings, but also think about how do we get to those buildings and how do we connect them to community, and how do we use that sense of efficiency and closeness to build the communities, which is what we really all want, that sense of connectedness, that sense of being part of a broader community. So I think it's a good first step.
I love this idea of net zero communities, that we have buildings sharing their energy consumption, when someone is maybe away for the summer, that they can share the energy they're generating with their neighbor. I think that's a really sort of inspiring way to, again, think of energy as a resource rather than just something that we take for granted so much of the time. Mina, how about you? Communities, people.
Thank you, Victoria. I think I greatly appreciate you putting the people at the heart and at the forefront of the conversation when we talk about net zero carbon buildings, because it's all about finding that right balance between planetary health while also promoting continuously health and well-being of the people. So I greatly appreciate the question. I think if I may frame it around two sort of aspects, and I would like to talk about visible benefits and invisible benefits, sort of that the net zero carbon buildings or built environments could have or have over the communities. The visible benefits, I think, are easier to understand and to digest, and those are the immediate ones. And I know you mentioned that we shouldn't be necessarily looking at energy and carbon, but the immediate visible one is the cost savings, is the energy reduction during operational stage, is the overall assets like management sort of hurdle that gets saved by creating a resilient, self-sustaining building through the net zero performance targets. But I think the other aspect, perhaps it's important to highlight, that net zero buildings, and this is beyond a single building, similar to what Marcin was saying, is about how they create this equilibrium between the natural environment and the built environment, and also how they would enable the nature to thrive, which eventually will have an indirect or direct impact to the well-being of that community. And just an example, especially when we consider master plans, or going beyond an individual building scale, but looking at a group of buildings that are enabling a community to inhabit in a district or neighborhood. Typically, to get to that net zero ambition today, it will heavily rely on carbon sequestration to deliver net zero carbon at that scale. And an immediate solution to ensure carbon sequestration is factored into the overall design is increasing vegetation and tree planting on that master plan. And I'm not going to talk about the obvious impact of what trees have in terms of contributing to the well-being of the communities, but I think it's important that there is this almost like a co-benefit that is being created. And if we can look at net zero buildings beyond the physical environment, but also consider their interaction with the natural environment.
And I think especially following the lockdown situations we've found ourselves in, people are really starting to value their sense of place and the benefit of having nature and natural spaces that you can enjoy, and what that brings to your well-being. So excellent.
Victoria, the other aspect that I didn't mention much, but it was just about this invisible benefit, if I can briefly touch upon that, I think, and Marcin has touched upon this earlier, it's more about the sort of the education, the educational benefit or the social awareness that comes with being in a community that occupies or inhabits net zero built environments. That results, and we've seen this in majority of our projects from Africa to Middle East to Asia, where we're literally designing new cities or very large scale projects where the rigor that the design can bring with the net zero ambition or the very sort of higher performing sustainability targets in a project actually enables a mindset shift that happens within that community. So there is an, I think, invisible or indirect impact that net zero carbon buildings or very highly ambitious sustainable built environments can bring into the lifestyle and behavior change, which then we can truly call those communities net zero communities.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Bianca, I know that your commitments and the actions that you've been taking as an organization, your experience is that actually it's extending beyond the company into your employees' lives.
Yeah, absolutely, and indeed into the communities around our manufacturing sites as well. I suppose Marcin and Mina have covered it beautifully, but I suppose maybe one example I could share from our end was working with our neighbouring farmers to develop an anaerobic digestion plant on our land, but we were actually taking a byproduct of their processes and then using that to generate renewable energy for us. So, you know, bring us very close together as neighbours, and it actually ended up us kind of trying to create a wider renewable energy type of network within the areas around where that plant was. So, you know, again, moving beyond just our own operations and going out into the communities and working with people around us to try and come up with solutions for us, but also, you know, a solution for them as well in terms of their waste and using it to create renewable energy. So that's just one project, I suppose, that springs to mind. But yeah, lots of stuff happening, and it's just, I think commitments kind of breed action. And once you start to ask the right questions or, you know, try to involve people, it's amazing actually what comes out of it. When we began like 8-9 years ago, we never dreamt we would be doing that type of thing. So it's amazing the opportunities that presents themselves when you move forward with action.
Great, and yeah, really, really fascinating to see that happening in real time as well. Thank you. We've got a question here, Mina, from the audience. Please excuse me if I'm putting you on the spot here. But the question is, what is your take or professional view on biodiversity offsets when it comes to net zero on a community or precinct scale? I think we've talked about, or we've touched a little bit on offsets as part of a strategy where that's necessary as part of a net zero transition. So maybe we can just talk about the role of nature-based solutions here.
Thank you, Victoria, and thank you for the audience asking that question. I think my answer will be the same to carbon offsets, to the biodiversity offsets, and I will also briefly mention about, I guess, my perspective on the importance of the nature-based solutions. If I may go first mention the offsets, I think in the interim period and in the short, perhaps the next few years, and not too many, but perhaps the next 2-3 years, in the interim period, perhaps offsets could be allowed, both for biodiversity and carbon, and especially if we're looking at heavily built city centers and where we're not starting from scratch, as Marcin was talking about the global south, where there's a huge momentum of creating new buildings, so there is an opportunity to start with a clean slate to do things right from day one. But if we're especially in the large metropolitan city areas where it's already heavily and developed and very high density, then it's a bit more difficult to perhaps get to that net zero target today immediately with the limited opportunities we may have, both, especially from a biodiversity perspective, because it's really difficult to introduce nature in a very highly densified city centers. However, I would say that should be still the last resort, and I would very much encourage, and this is the mindset we have at SOM in every project we deliver, regardless of the scale or the location, and regardless whether it's a new build or renovation, is that nature is a fundamental part of our design aspirations, and incorporating nature and finding that balance between the natural environment and physical environment is really key. So, for example, as a rule of thumb, what we try to do, wherever it's possible, we try to incorporate 1 tree per person in any project that we're doing. So to make sure that there is that nature element, and nature is as equal as human beings for us. So it's just making sure that living environment or living organisms are equally addressed.
That reminds me of a criteria that's within the Green Mark sustainability rating tool in Singapore that looks at the ratio of green space that you replace when you develop a new building, and it really shows with their green city, and you can't help but smile. Such a wonderful green luscious place. Cynthia.
A lot of, also just jumping in quickly, I think there's a lot of innovation that we can do, even in urban environments, in terms of greening our urban environments. You're right, when Mina says it's dense, it's not easy to do, but I do think we have to have those offsets as the last choice, and look at some of the innovative things we can do in terms of literally bringing green into buildings, literally putting green roofs on buildings, literally having some of the more open spaces be greened. And so I think that it can release a lot of our innovation and creativity and challenge people to how do you bring green into the cities? Because as you said, we really, as humans enjoy it. I enjoy having that green around us. And so it's not only does it help our buildings, does it help our planet, but it really helps our, sense of community, sense of peace, sense of connection. So let's not give up on greening the urban environments as well.
Absolutely, thank you.
Absolutely, and it's all of those things that Marcin mentioned. It's also, there are studies out there that show the direct correlation between crime rate and green in a community. And there was one here in Worcester, Mass, where because the Japanese beetle, they had to effectively clear cut trees. It was really traumatic for the community, and they saw after that a spike in crime. And that's just one example, but there are studies out there that show that direct correlation. It's really meaningful, and it also ends up with education and so yeah, let us not give up on those green spaces, as Marlene said.
And are you seeing other examples of this, Cynthia, within your own developments or your own or with your clients around how you're able to create healthy spaces both inside and outside?
Yeah, we've been engaged with Harvard School of Public Health. Dr. Joe Allen has led a study on the cognitive function, the effects of healthy buildings on the occupants. And, particularly now in COVID land, it's even more important. But what the study has shown is that the cognitive function can be increased by 26% and decrease sick building symptoms by 30%, improve sleep by over 6%. So first time that there are quantitative metrics and evidence that of the impact on communities in terms of health and well-being. So that is, and our clients are very much focused right now, as you can imagine, on health and well-being, and how do we use buildings as a line of defense, and how do we better use the space that we have to promote health, not only for occupants but for the communities around. One client that we're working with right now is looking at, oh, by the way, we do a lot of incineration of our waste, and that impacts the health of the communities around us. That's, we're not a good neighbor. And so what are the things that we can do to address that? So taking, again, that broader perspective of not only what it means inside the four walls, but what it means outside the walls, and how those actions can really translate and be pervasive throughout the surrounding communities.
Great, thank you so much. Anything to add from the panel on communities and people before we move on to our third component? Oh, we're all good. Well, I think this is as I sort of set out at the very beginning, we really need to see this as part of a component of systems, as part of an ecosystem. And so lots of the green building rating tools do cover a lot of those other sustainability impacts, as well as addressing net zero. So hopefully we will be encouraging many developers to be looking beyond the borders and the boundaries of the building as well. Okay, so finally, our third component of the campaign is planet. So we've covered economies and communities, and now to the planet. So it is very well known that buildings account for more than 1/3 of global carbon emissions, and that net zero buildings dramatically reduce energy demand and use renewable energy sources, as we've mentioned today. This week, we welcomed, in addition to Kingspan, who are already a signatory to the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Commitment, SOMs, Kid Moorings and Merrill officially joined us on Monday, and as did JLL for their global operations. So could you just take a moment to share some of the initiatives that your organizations are employing to ensure that our sector is more responsible with the planet's finite resources? Let's go to Bianca first, seeing as you are well underway with your delivery commitment.
Sure, yeah, no problem. So as a global product manufacturer, our focus is on significantly reducing our carbon footprint as a company as we continue to grow. We do this to help protect the planet and life as we know it, but also importantly, because we believe it represents a significant business opportunity for us to thrive in the future. In our operations, we've been working on the net zero program I mentioned. We've set science-based targets, looking at emissions beyond our direct control, up and down our value chain, and indeed, how that affects the product embodied carbon. Our new Planet Passionate program, which we just launched in December, builds on all of that work. And it takes a holistic approach, aiming to address the most material impacts to our business, with targets to increase our use of renewable and recyclable raw materials, to provide product take-back schemes to the market, to significantly reduce supply chain carbon, and also to achieve net zero carbon manufacturing by 2030. In doing all this, our ultimate goal is to rapidly reduce the environmental footprint of the company, whilst increasing the environmental performance of our products to help enable a net zero built environment of the future. We also actively engage with industry, so we're part of the Net Zero Carbon Building Commitment, but as part of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we're a CE 100 member, and they have a working group on the built environment, which is aimed at accelerating emissions reduction while also trying to embed a circular economy approach within the built environment. So that's a flavour of what we're working on at the moment, but I suppose the key goal for my team and the teams around the company is that reducing the footprint as we grow the business, and actually enhancing the products as we do so as well.
Great, good stuff. Thank you, Bianca, and best of luck with continuing with hitting those very ambitious targets. Perhaps come to Mina next about the announcement, the commitment that SOM have just made.
Thank you, Victoria. We're very excited to be joining the World Green Building Council's Net Zero Carbon Buildings commitment and really amplifying the action across the global sector. And I think we're also in a very unique position, being a global interdisciplinary firm involving urban planners, interior designers, engineers, architects. We believe that we actually have a key role that we can play in amplifying the message of acting on climate, but also, perhaps more important, by way of action, leading the broader design industry, involving various disciplines and professions join this important action together with us. So I think, in addition to putting our house in order, as one of our partners would say, by signing to this commitment, we already have in place a tracking and measuring process across the firm of understanding the direct implications of our decisions, business operation decisions, and we continuously monitor and try to improve the overall consumption throughout the I think on a biannual basis, that we're actually trying to implement key strategies, learning from the data, as we talked about before. So the data that we gather in our offices, sharing that with everyone across the firm, and not only getting the feedback, but also merging that insights we get from the data, coupled with the end users' needs and also the businesses' needs. We actually strive forward key strategies for the upcoming 6 months to continuously reduce our carbon emissions and energy use predominantly in our offices. But I think in addition to that, we also, of course, acknowledge that our greatest impact is made in the built environments that we design and deliver around the world. So our projects, which is our day-to-day work, is really keen on unlocking our potential as a company, as a business, for actioning on the net zero and climate ambition and action at scale. And therefore, over 9-10 years ago now, we've actually signed up to the AIA's 2030 commitment, which entails getting all of our design projects to be at least operationally carbon neutral by 2030. So we're also trying to practice what we preach in our design work. And I think another really exciting initiative that is quite relatively new in our company that I would love to share is we've launched this initiative about 3 years ago, what we call DSPEC. And it is, and it stands for D-specifications, and it's very much focused on dechemicalizing and decarbonizing our specifications as we make choices and decisions on the materials and product selection for our projects. And so I think we're actually currently going through, it's a very rigorous program we put in place. And as global SOM, there are quite a significant number of diverse individuals from diverse backgrounds that are working on this initiative to get all of our specifications predominantly to be low carbon, involving low carbon materials and materials with no or zero, low or zero chemical content. So we hope that, I think in this process, obviously, we're also engaging and liaising with manufacturers and suppliers to demand EPDs, HPDs, so that hopefully by this internal initiative, as we have as SOM, we're trying to create this demand from the manufacturers, and in turn, hopefully paving the path to a market transformation and transition in the longer supply chain.
Excellent. Thank you, Mina. And again, thank you for your leadership and taking on that responsibility on behalf of your clients. So Cynthia, also very recently, a very big announcement from JLL. Please share what you have recently committed to.
Thank you very much. And can I just say, Mina, awesome. That's great to see. Yeah, we are stepping up and stepping out. I have to say, a lot more than we have historically, and it's really exciting to see, and it's a recognition of our responsibility, not only as a leader in the built sector and in the real estate services sector, but also because we have, with our scale, our global scale, we have the opportunity to really influence actions with and through our clients. We manage on behalf of our clients 1,500 times the square footage that we ourselves occupy. So that is clearly our biggest opportunity, is with and through our clients, is with and through our suppliers. So as you mentioned, we excitedly announced on Monday that we have joined a net zero commitment, and that follows on the heels of our science-based target that was approved by SBTi. And then interestingly, we just today joined forces with a number of other companies signing on to the Business for Nature, which is a joint call to recognize the crucial aspect of a healthy ecosystem. So we're everybody's kind of piling on, which is exactly the actions that we want. So what that means for us is greater energy efficiencies, employing using more energy efficiency across our own operations, renewables wherever possible, occupying only green certified space, electrifying our fleet. So it's a whole series of global real estate guidelines that we're laying out for our own folks globally to follow, to help get us to that net zero and achieve our science-based target. But likewise with our stakeholders, we're just rolling out now a global procurement, sustainability procurement framework. And that's very significant for us. We procure on behalf not only for ourselves, but also on behalf of our clients, a tremendous amount of materials and products, as you can imagine. And so working with our suppliers on what the best approach would be, how do we minimize that environmental impact? How do we offer better, more choice to our clients? So that's something we're very excited about. And generally recognizing that the opportunity or influence with our clients, regardless of our line of business, is key. And thankfully, our clients are very much increasingly recognizing that there's an element here that they need to latch onto, and they need to employ whatever in whatever area of the business that they are in, and are looking to us and to other providers to help them find the best way. You know, most have set a goal. Most who have set that goal don't know how they're going to get there. I mean, I would argue that virtually none of us really know exactly how we're going to get to the, you know, kind of the end state, if there is in fact an end state. But we all need, you know, the beauty about that is people recognize that they need help, and that this has to be a collaborative approach. And so we're all in on collaborating across our stakeholders to, you know, to lift all boats.
Great, thank you very much, and bring them all along with you, which is fantastic to see. Thank you. And so, Marcin, the EDGE certification program that you've mentioned already, there's some really great statistics out there in terms of the sorts of reduced resource and energy consumption that you can see from certified buildings. There's a real benefit in going through that process.
Exactly, and I think, you know, we just heard these great stories from different kind of companies, and I think it's very important that we learn what's actually happening out there. And one of the things on our that we do is we have hundreds of stories out there. So I encourage people to go to the website edgebuildings.com. There are hundreds of stories that you can learn from. What are other people actually doing? I mean, these are actions that are taken. People are already doing it. And for example, we have 72 zero carbon ready buildings who have built their buildings in a way that they are ready to go to zero carbon. And we just recently certified our first zero carbon, meaning that this is a building that has been operating for a year and has met the zero carbon criteria that I explained earlier. This is a company called Arthurland, and they're in the Philippines, and they do mostly you know, Class A commercial buildings, and it's a wonderful story. First, they've agreed to work with the World Green Building Council to have all of their commercial buildings zero carbon by 2030. So the first one is inspired them to do all of their buildings. Second, they've been able, and this is kind of bringing it back to the investment side, they've been able to launch a green bond based on this green building and their future plans. And Bianca talked a little bit about her company and doing the green bond. Their green bond had so much interest that they were able to add, I think it was like $20–30 million more in the issuance. Increased to $59 million in the issuance because of the interest of investors, of people in supporting this idea of green bonds. So this is wonderful, wonderful information. We have a lot of it out there for people to hear. Also, if you want to hear more about the Arthurland story, which is a great story from a family-owned business in the Philippines, right? A leader now doing zero carbon in the Philippines. There's in our podcast called Climate Biz, that's B-I-Z. There's a whole episode about Arthurland. So please tune into that and find out that story of how these hard-nosed business types really brought that concept of sustainability, and how that, as Cynthia pointed out, they've had some of the highest rents from their tenants for this building. They have some of the highest occupancy in a downtown office building. So it's a wonderful, wonderful story about how, you know, investing in sustainability can, you know, be good for business as well. And we have hundreds of them. So please come visit our website and learn not only the stories that these ladies have told us, but hundreds of stories out there. It's very inspirational. People can do it. Even if you don't know the way, as Cynthia pointed out, you can learn a lot from other people and take those first few steps. That's what's most important. You don't have to know the outcome. Take those first few steps.
That's great. And also the power of storytelling as well. You know, the more people that are really embracing this concept and helping to deliver it through and seeing some of these broader benefits, you know, hopefully others will be inspired to do it. So on that note, I'm going to launch a poll. So for those of you joining as an attendee of this webinar that you can respond to. So we're going to ask you, here we go, about your organization and whether your organization is acting on a net zero commitment, preparing to make a net zero commitment, willing to learn more about net zero commitments, or waiting for regulation before you take that plunge, let's say. We've got lots of people voting, so I'll leave it on the board just for a few seconds, and then we'll maybe have a quick wrap up on what our panelists think about the answers. So we'll give that just a few more seconds. Okay, so we'll give it 3, 2, there's still people voting. Okay, we'll close that poll now and let's have a look at the responses. So we have had 56% of people who are joining us today are acting on a net zero commitment. So that is very inspiring and a lot higher than I would have expected, actually. We have 12% preparing to make a net zero commitment, around 30% willing to learn more, and 3% waiting for regulation. And again, that's a lot lower than I expected. So I think really encouraging to see that those organizations that are able to are starting to consider what it means for their organization. So fantastic. So based on everything that we've learned, our campaign is calling for governments to adopt bolder and more ambitious regulation towards net zero buildings. And if we've learned anything from this COVID-19 situation, the global pandemic, it's that we need to listen to our scientists. And climate scientists have been telling us for a long time that this is coming. We're seeing incredibly extreme and extensive and more frequent climate events that are devastating our planet, and we really need to take this action. And we've seen the benefits of those companies that are taking the lead. So what gives you hope that our industry is ready and prepared to deliver against the frankly unprecedented targets that we're calling for within regulation? How about you, Mina?
Thank you, Victoria. I think that's a great question. I have hope that our industry is ready to deliver against ambitious net zero targets because we have all the right knowledge and tools and systems and technologies, as you mentioned at the opening speech, already available to us today to design and deliver net zero carbon buildings. And the industry has actually been building foundations. So this is something Cynthia has referred to earlier. We've been at it for a while. So the industry has been building its foundations for a net zero carbon future over the years, and few amazing examples out there that are built that are inspirational net zero carbon or net zero energy buildings are a testament to this argument and a hypothesis. And even we at SOM have a series of those built examples out there that we've designed over 15 years ago. So there was definitely an opportunity. There has been for long an opportunity to really implement this. And I think having said that, it's also important to emphasize that my hope in the industry relies on the fact that there has also been greater upskilling and capacity building across the global sector. We've talked about the importance of education, but especially over the recent years, we see that across the global industry, wanting to streamline the knowledge base around net zero carbon and sustainability in general and make it a mainstream with a common language, expectation and ambition across the industry and sector. And this gives me a hope that the built environment professionals are continuously becoming more and more upskilled and more knowledgeable. So this doesn't necessarily is a demand for a magical solution from an expert to solve, but it becomes a shared responsibility across the industry. And if I may just add one other observation, I think why I'm hopeful is because I think across the industry, and hopefully this is the experience of everyone similar to us, is that we see a greater willingness to collaboration and greater willingness to share insights and ideas and experiences, I think, than we've ever had before. Because there is a common ground, as I mentioned before, there's a unifying mission and an end goal we all want to reach, you know, for the benefit, not only for the industry and sector, but for us personally. And I think there is this sense of ownership that has been instilled around the global sector, both at a personal level, but also as an industry level, we really acknowledge our responsibility. So I'm hopeful by working together as a collective, we can not only lift the industry up, but also transform the overall market by setting this expectation and creating demand for net zero carbon buildings for a better generation for us and the next ones to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we'll have you on every panel from now on so that you can say that to everyone. Okay, Bianca, please.
I suppose just echoing what Mina has said, we do have the skills and technology. I think what we really need is certainty over future direction of travel via ambitious regulation to signal the market. It won't be easy, obviously, to implement that, but governments have shown through the pandemic that they are prepared to take strong action in times of need. Climate change is a crisis. It's just happening in slow motion, but nonetheless, it still requires the same level of urgency. So in my experience, we obviously try and, through our trade organizations, try and ask for, stronger regulations around reducing energy and carbon within buildings. So I think it's certainty over future direction of travel actually that's needed via ambitious regulation, and the market will respond as it always does.
Thank you. Cynthia.
Absolutely concur. I think our purpose at JLL is to create the future of real estate for a better world, and we believe that, and we're living into that purpose. But I think that, as Bianca said, you need certainty as much as you can get. Businesses always want that certainty of regulation, and because it creates and it leads to innovation. And innovation really, it gets kickstarted and amplified when you have regulation, when you have a clearer direction of the future. And I would invite folks to check out Park 2020, which is a community in the Netherlands. I know you know it well, Victoria, where it was built on the foundations of Cradle to Cradle. William McDonough, not surprisingly, was involved, and the firm was involved. And the result is 23% return on the sale of the first phase of the development. I mean, it's just it's right there in front of our faces. We see it, and there was a tremendous amount of innovation that went into the creation and the development of that community, because they went in with, this is going to be cradle to cradle. We are going to follow these directives and create a community that reflects that. And that's the kind of thing. It's so exciting when you see things like that, and it shows all of us what the possibility is. And so I am optimistic because I am a confirmed optimist, because you have to be in this space, but because I see things like that. And I see it in other things that our clients are doing every day, and what we're helping to bring forward with them every day. So I am optimistic. There's a new position, which I never heard of. There's a new position called the Chief Resilience Officer. And that has been, there are 86 cities globally that now have a Chief Resilience Officer. That speaks volumes, right? That speaks volumes, because there's that recognition. We got to do something, and the time to do it is now. We need to act now on climate.
And very much driven, I would imagine, by its impact on their citizens, on the people, the real life reality that we're living in as a result of the impacts of climate change. Marcin, before I come to you on this question of hope about the industry being ready to deliver these targets, I perhaps could supplement it with a question that's come in from the audience about how you feel about a lack of encouragement for net zero buildings in developing nations like India. So the very specific question here, but if we could perhaps sort of tailor the question about hope for industry in delivering those targets around encouraging them, to show that it's possible within some of these nations.
Right. Well, I have a slightly different perspective coming from emerging markets about regulations. And then on the hope issue, I have what I think is some good news. So on the regulation issue, I mean, we do believe that regulations are very helpful, and obviously they send a clear message people can abide by. We've done a lot of working with building codes, say in Indonesia or Vietnam, helping the countries actually build their green building codes. But what we've also found is that, you know, there's a sense of urgency now. We have a very short time to bend this curve. And particularly in the emerging markets, regulations, and in the developed world too, take a very, very long time. And in the emerging markets, they have the other challenge of, you know, capacity to enforce these, capacity to implement these regulations, and that whole period can take a very, very long time. So, you know, our recommendation is on top of doing regulations, really are important, right? They set that bottom line. But we also found that working public-private partnerships, working together with incentives around targets, outcomes that you want, are equally impactful and a lot faster. We've seen cities where they've put in incentives, and not all these incentives are financial. I mean, you can have a tax incentive, but for developers and for business owners and for occupants, some of these incentives can be things like, you know, you get an extra floor, you get more density, you get faster certifications that you can, you know, you go through, things like that, which can actually put money in developers' pockets, or in if you're building out in the pockets because you're going faster, are very, very effective. And it has the target, so you have the same kind of outcome. So I would say for the emerging markets is a little different than developed markets, who are very, you know, have huge capacity to implement, huge capacity to enforce, you know, very much a system where people are used to, like, there's a regulation, there's a law, let me, you know, figure it out. In the emerging markets, incentives is another way of going about it. And then in the hope, I mean, I can repeat what everyone has said, that we absolutely have the capacity to do this today. But we are also investing in the future. So what we found, also looking into universities and schools of architect and schools of engineers, that we are not finding as much green building education for our young people who are going to be the next inventors, the next builders, the next leasers. So we've got a program as well working with these university students, and the next generation gets it. They are in, you know, they are all for this. I was talking just recently to the president of Standard Bank, which is just in South Africa, and he was saying how the young people are the ones who are, you know, forcing the current generation to move faster, to do more, to build greener, etc. And so there's a lot of hope in our next generation. And so we have to continue to encourage our younger people, those up and coming architects, those up and coming engineers, to build green and to incorporate that. And they are open for it. They are looking for it. So we need to listen to them as well.
Well, yes, absolutely fantastic. Well, on that note, and I'm glad you mentioned the role of incentives and finance, because I have another poll that I'd like to launch. So pay attention to your screen. We're going to bring up the next one. The last one, you'll be pleased to know. So what do you see as the most necessary in order to enable your organization to progress towards net zero? So looking at these enablers, would it be stronger government regulation, increase in market demand, access to finance and incentives, new technology, or finally greater knowledge of existing solutions? So again, lots of people voting. Thank you very much. We'll leave it up for a few more seconds. Great, we've still got the votes coming in. And then we'll come for some very quick fire reactions from the panel. Okay, 3 more seconds. Get your votes in. Okay, let's see. So We have, okay, a slightly different response to what we've seen on some of the local Green Building Council sessions that we've had this week. The highest in terms of percentage is actually increase in market demand. So that's really interesting. We're really sort of needing to still see that pull or, you know, that sort of stronger encouragement from those who are procuring some of these buildings to say that this is what we need. And I think probably linked in some way to regulation, because that will ultimately create that market demand in swathes. So joint second, stronger government regulation and access to finance and incentives, then greater knowledge of existing solutions, and then right down with a 3% response rate is new technology. So I think that gives me hope that we do have the solutions existing within the market to deliver these solutions. The demand, the finance, the regulation is really, as we say, what's needed to unlock the full potential of that sector. So let's move on to our final question, and I think I'll probably wrap these two, as we're up at time nearly, together. So I'd like to come to you each for a very quick key takeaway from today's session, but if I could ask you to sort of try and bring it into a policy ask from government, seeing as this is all about our call to action this year in terms of what we need to see from policy. So your key policy ask in order to take this forward. So we'll go in order of how I can see you on screen here. So firstly, Marcin.
So one thing that we didn't talk about that I'd like just to raise for answering that is the issue of access to finance. Obviously, we're a financial institution, and I think that is really key to scaling this, to having the market demand out there as well. And we just have a program supported by the UK government called MAGIC, where the idea is that we work with financial institutions. We probably invest in over 190 financial institutions around the world, and we're working with them to put together new green products, both for construction finance and for green mortgages, right? So both the push and the pull. And I think that's so important to be able to work with the banks, because if the developers feel like the money is there, they're willing to do the buildings. And if the owners feel like there's an advantage to getting, buying a green home or a green apartment is through a green mortgage, then they will do that. And then part of that, and we talked about this a little bit in terms of research, we're really trying to do the research, and this is part of this program, to show folks that you really do save money if you build green, that utility savings goes right into your pocket. That for financial institutions, we're showing in emerging markets that you have actually better credit for people who are buying green homes, that the sales are faster, that the resale value is more. All of these make that demand higher. From both the end user and from the developers and from the financial institutions. So we need to bring the financial institutions as part of this ecosystem. Really important to be able to drive this type of green building and drive the demand. So I'd like to say that. And then finally, just in terms of governments, again, I think we need to be able to have more government and private sector cooperation. I mean, governments can do a lot in terms of leading, in terms of greening their own buildings. That's one of the things that we first say when we talk to governments, like, lead the way, show us what you can do to retrofit your own buildings, what you can do to show the rest of the world what green looks like. So that's one thing, that's one ask I would say to government. And then two, again, the idea of incentives. People are very open to and follow incentives. So if you can give people incentives to do this type of outcome-based, right? At the end of the day, it's good to build green, but we really want to operate green. We want to get to net zero. So give people the incentives, give people the kudos when they are able to actually achieve those targets. That would be my ask to the government.
Great. Thank you very much, Marcin. I think I'd be with you there. Mina, your key policy ask.
Thank you, Victoria. My key policy ask will be to be immediately implemented, will be to demand public declaration of measured in use data for operation energy and carbon, and also as-built data for embodied carbon for all the buildings, both renovations and new builds. And I would encourage that this becomes an ask and a regulation by 2021 onwards. And perhaps in the interim period, something we briefly talked about, and I would cautiously say this again, but a part of this requirement, an asset or building would either have an option to upgrade and renovate if it's falling short on meeting or being on the trajectory to a net zero carbon by 2030, or be allowed to make carbon offset payments, but that would be second resort. And I would like to actually leave the audience also with a thought, and perhaps with a very obvious one, but I personally live this and breathe this on a day-to-day basis. I very much own this and feel a great sense of responsibility to what I'm going to share now. But I think time is something we cannot buy, and we're literally racing against time. Even though we talk about 2030 or 2050, even if it's 2030, 10 years is not a long enough time, especially. And I feel this personally because the projects I work on, the designs I'm delivering today are actually only going to be built within the next 6-7 years. So I actually don't have the time personally, or many in my position don't have the time, the luxury of time to trial and test things. So what the decisions we're making today is actually defining the decade ahead or the decades ahead. So it's really important that we keep reminding ourselves of the urgency of the matter of when we talk about climate and biodiversity emergence. And I would call everyone to action on climate, no matter what part they can hold on to. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Super inspiring. Bianca.
It is hard to narrow down one, but I suppose mandatory energy building requirements in all countries to begin with. You know, I saw a very scary percentage before. I think it was 66% of countries around the world don't have them, and having an equal requirement for the renovation of buildings. So Ireland is a very good example where the requirement when you're refurbishing a building is extremely low in comparison to the requirement for a new build. So that's obviously something that needs to be fixed. And also addressing embodied carbon with it, making it mandatory similarly to how it's done for operational carbon in buildings at the moment. I think they're all crucial. Key takeaway, very similar to Mina, I mean, we just don't have time. You know, the decisions that we are making today will be realised in buildings now for decades to come. We're locking in decisions. The built environment has an opportunity to really help to tackle climate change, but you know, if things go on as they are, they actually have a bigger potential to make things worse through building, you know, a lot more real estate to, you know, not the level at which we need it. So we're obviously preaching to the converted here, but you know, for us all just to think, you know, what is the small part that we can play in our everyday lives, be it in our work lives or personal, to help to tackle this challenge, because indeed we just don't have time anymore.
Thank you. And Cynthia, finally.
Yeah. Building on everything that my colleagues here said, I think you know, building standards is key. We can't just be waiting on you know, the good fortunes of certain companies to say, okay, I'm going to build something new and it's going to be, you know, LEED Platinum or WELL or whatever it might be, in net zero embodied everything. The vast majority of our building stock is existing buildings. We have to be able to put in place, and the vast majority are not Class A, right? So we have to put in place standards that will raise the bar on existing stock, as well as new builds that aren't going to be, you know, Class A buildings. So that, I think, is it can't be underestimated in terms of the impact that it would have, because we can't just be talking to ourselves here. It has to be far more broad and pervasive, and now would be the time.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I mean, I think we could continue this conversation for several more hours amongst the five of us. So thank you for those of you for sticking with us. I'd just like to wrap up this session. I know we're at time, so thank you. We will be having this session hosted on our YouTube channel, so you can always come back and revisit it. Our national green building councils around the world are working to support the uptake of net zero buildings through the development of tools, certification schemes, resources, training and education programs. And to find out what's happening in your country and how you can get involved, please visit our website and contact your local green building council. Don't forget, you can join our call to action for that bolder and more ambitious regulation by endorsing our statement. Support our campaign to accelerate net zero buildings through policy. So you can find the link on our website. Thank you for joining us today in this important discussion. Thank you so much to our panelists for your insights and to the audience for your participation. Please join us in one of our other sessions this week to find out more and visit our website to see how you can get involved. We must act on climate for our sector and for everyone, everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.